Hello everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast. This will be the final audio podcast in this series. This audio podcast, as part of the Squeal and Squark. This audio podcast is part of the ship mode unit. This audio podcast is part of a Hannah Squad, and this audio podcast is part of a ZtormLabostix production. So, in through this in and through this audio podcast today, one of the questions is, or the question is what is your advice for students considering a career that link laboratory medicine or blood sciences and or pathology and academia. I suppose in one way or another, I have looked to answer this question in one of the previous audio podcasts in this series, but to elaborate a little bit, I suppose, is that so the way science is the way laboratory medicine has is sort of traditionally sort of perceived or understood, is that on the one side it is where there's this perceived basis that healthcare that such healthcare that the health that the sciences healthcare workforce sort of alongside their sort of alongside the routine sort of laboratory sort of works that take place within the different divisions of blood of and in around blood sciences, is that that the healthcare science workforce actually, or the science workforce actually, sort of routinely actually develop sort of written works in around aspects of different illnesses or healthcare sort of challenges, based on a sort of based on sort of based on in around different cases, or sort of novel cases or particular cases that may that come that actually are known about, or are known about, based on different where there can be, where different science workforce leads, for example, where different science workforce leads tend to have, or have or are part of multidisciplinary team meetings, and through the cases that are discussed, or sort of understood, that within the sciences, that they actually that as part of their sort of laboratory workings, laboratory workings, that they actually develop sort of writings in around these particular cases. So on the one side, there is that sort of perception, or that sort of perspective, but the flip side to that is that actually, whilst whilst there is a perspective, whilst there is that sort of perspective, unfortunately, in the majority of laboratory workings, or laboratory environments, blood sciences and blood science divisions, and irrespective, for example, of where professionals where science professionals, for example, are part of, or form part of multidisciplinary team efforts. For example, there's rarely opportunities that they actually develop writings in context of their laboratory, part of a laboratory sort of analyses that take place, analyses that take place based on patient cases that are discussed as part of those multidisciplinary team meetings. So there is that basis on the flip side, and so one of the things one of the things that 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 I would say and sort of advise students considering sort of working or having a sort of pathway a pathway into the sciences is actually to develop a sort of develop sort of an understanding on topics or themes that they're actually intrigued by, and actually develop their writings so that it's a way to actually as a way to firstly sort of be collaborative, but also secondly to be actually those kinds of students who actually want to develop contribution to the sciences in context of their learnings in around particular illnesses and particular divisions of laboratory medicines and or blood sciences. So having that sort of that sort of mental attitude, that sort of mental attitude early on, is where the sciences, where the sciences, where the sciences prospectively can actually can actually advance in different ways. So in the act in the two in the sort of perspective where there's the perspective of where, for example, where there is that perspective where, for example, healthcare where science professionals within the workforce, where they're part of multidisciplinary team meetings, and there's a sort of a perspective where they may have opportunities, or they might have opportunities to develop their writings in around particular patient cases. That in that context is normally in that particular context is where frontline healthcare professionals that are, for example, at consultant level, or at, for example, for example, at consultant level, or for example, at sort of from the level of a clinician, is where there tends to be more opportunities for such professionals, for those such healthcare professionals to develop works in around particular patient cases, and healthcare and the sciences, the science workforce actually sort of where they form where they depending on where such science professionals are sort of regionally, they don't often there's not often an opportunity for different gradings of those within the science workforce to actually develop collaborative efforts with clinical colleagues, or medical or multidisciplinary team colleagues in that context. So where there is that perspective, it's rarely that actually often takes place. So on the flip side, as mentioned as well, where it's perceived that, or for example, that those within the science workforce actually within different divisions of pathology or blood sciences, for example, that they have where they develop writings alongside their sort of in around as part of their as part of forming analyses in around patient specimens, for example. It is rarely that they have sort of that opportunity to do so, to develop their works in such a way for in context of evidence, or in context of developing evidence-based practices. So in as part of the advice, in as part of advice for students sort of considering a career that link laboratory medicine, blood sciences, and academia, is actually to to see a way to form collaborative efforts early on, and actually in a way where they can develop their writings in as part of part of their writings that they may or would do in as part of their, for example, their undergrad or postgrad, early postgrad works, for example, and in such a way that they actually develop their writings early on, so that they can they have opportunity to develop evidence-based practices, or get an understanding of developing evidence-based practices, and in such a way that they have a pathway that links between sort of aspects of laboratory medicines or blood sciences, and sort of blood science environs, and into a way to link their works in context of academia. So that's the advice I would give. Because students tend to so irrespective of where students will be in their in aspects of their learning, that they have those opportunities to develop their writings, as a way to at the same time developing their aptitude in around in around sort of being sort of inquisitive, and asking those important questions that they may have in around particular illnesses, etc. So that's the advice I would give, and sort of developing writings early on, for example, is also something that also is important in context of general proficiency in the sciences. So there would be times, for example, where, for example, as mentioned, in some ways that those within the science workforce don't often get time to develop writings in around some of the important questions that they may have in around aspects of a particular illnesses. And so therefore, by actually developing writings or being inquisitive, is where students who contemplate a sort of a pathway in linking sort of in around linking or interlinking blood sciences with academia, is where those writings can be of advantage, sort of where in a way that they can develop those early writings into formal manuscripts for peer review and publications. So having that basis and that way is important generally, because for those within that are within pathology or sort of laboratory environs, don't often get the durations or the time, and to do don't often get the time to do so. And even in aspects of academia, academics or researchers themselves don't often get the time to develop works in a way that they would like to. So that future that the prospective students, and the way that students can develop, is a way to actually as per said, develop their writings, develop works or writings, so that they actually develop works in around themes that are for example important to them, and not just important, but in around themes that that students themselves are passionate about or compassionate about. So that's important. That's important, and so that's the advice I would give. I would give in around the response to this particular question. So that draws this audio podcast to a close. This audio podcast as part of the Squeal and Squark. This audio podcast as part of the Ship Mode Unit. This audio podcast as part of the HALA Squad, and this audio podcast as part of a ZtormLabostix production.